Welcome, my friends, to Biblical Musings. Since we concluded our series last week talking about different things involved in the salvation of man, this week I figured we'd kind of just look at a psalm together. I've been reading Psalm 36, and I found it most enlightening and most encouraging. I feel like in these times we all need a little encouragement and a little bit of something to lift us up a little bit. It's a beautiful Psalm of David, Psalm 36, and it's a simple format, but it just gives us truths you can understand and hold on to and give you some direction when times are bad or when times are good, depending on what's going on in your life. Without further ado, why don't we just get into it and read it and see what Psalm 36 has for us today. It says, by way of introduction, for the choir director, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord. Transgression speaks to the ungodly within his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes. For it flatters him in his own eyes concerning the discovery of his iniquity and the hatred of it. The words of his mouth are wickedness and deceit. He has ceased to be wise and to do good. His plans, he plans wickedness upon his bed. He sets himself on a path that is not good. He does not despise evil. Your loving kindness, O Lord, extends to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. Your judgments are like a great deep. O Lord, you preserve man and beast. How precious is your loving kindness, O God. And the children of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They drink their fill of the abundance of your house, and you give them to drink of the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. O continue your loving kindness to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright in heart. Let not the foot of pride come upon me, and let not the hand of the wicked drive me away. There the doers of iniquity have fallen. They have been thrust down and cannot rise. First off, David spends about 4 verses talking about those who do iniquity, those whose lives are saturated and are directed by iniquity. And he gives us some insights about how that comes to be. How does it happen that someone gives themselves over to wickedness and it controls their life and it sets the mood, it sets the context for their whole life, and their whole life becomes that thing, becomes wickedness. It said transgression speaks to the ungodly within his heart. Transgression speaks to the ungodly within his heart. Isn't that how it is for all of us? That the transgression is in your heart, in your inner being, saying, don't you want that? Isn't that thing something that you want? And it can take many, many forms, as you probably well know. But it speaks to us within our heart. The second part of that verse is, there's no fear of God before his eyes. Because that's the only thing that will keep the transgression that speaks to you in your heart at bay. That's the only thing that will keep that door shut, is if you fear God, if you respect him, if you acknowledge him, if you acknowledge that he exists. He's the creator of the universe, and he has ways and laws. He set up the world. Then you should fear him, because he's all powerful. I've said it many times, and I heard it from somewhere else, so it's not original. But I heard the story one time that there was this Russian scientist who was giving a talk on evolution, which I don't believe in. Well, that's a subject for another time. But he's talking about evolution. He was talking about how, we're going through space 1,000,000 miles an hour, however fast it is. It's not 1,000,000, but it's really fast. And there either is a God or there isn't. All right, I agree with that so far. Okay. And then he said something truly interesting. He said, both prospects are frightening. Either there is a God or there isn't. And both prospects are frightening. Because we're hurtling through space at an amazing rate of speed, and either there's somebody in charge or there isn't. And if somebody's in charge, then we need to find out who he is and what does he want, because he's in charge. That's frightening. And if nobody's around, that also is frightening. That's kind of a subject for a different time. But fear of God is what will keep transgression at bay. But for the wicked, there's no fear of God before his eyes. He says it flatters him in his own eyes concerning the discovery of his iniquity and the hatred of it. It gives us what we want to see. Entices us with the desires of our eyes and our iniquity. It says the words of his mouth are wickedness and deceit. That's what comes when your mind's been taken over by transgression. Your mouth will follow. It said he has ceased to be wise and to do good. That's interesting. It's not that he necessarily said, you know what, I'm going to wake up and do evil today. Because, let's be honest, whoever does that? Does that ever happen? Instead, he ceased to do good. He didn't necessarily decide to start doing bad. All he did was stop doing good. Says he plans wickedness upon his bed, and he sets himself on a path that is not good. Now, to me, this is very insightful, because there are some that would say, I had no choice. This is the way I've been made. I don't think so. Now, I know environmental factors, the way you're raised, what you're exposed to, all of that has an influence, and I don't want to discount that. But this psalm says he sets himself on a path that is not good. He plans wickedness on his bed. If all your time, when you rest, when you meditate, if you meditate at all, when the thoughts in your mind are only transgression and you give yourself to those thoughts, and there's no fear of God before your eyes, and you stop doing good, you'll start doing bad. And your mouth will follow your mind. And your words will be wickedness and deceit. They just will. And you'll begin to plan wickedness in your times of rest. You'll be able to think up things that you would like to do or plan to do that aren't necessarily good. When you get to that point, you have set yourself on a path that is not good. You have no one to blame but yourself, because thoughts have consequences. They do. Thoughts have consequences. Ideas have consequences. Why do they have consequences? Because they lead to other things. They lead to words. They lead to actions. They lead to attitudes. And if they're not good ones, then it leads to a path that is not good. And this last part of verse 4 says, he does not despise evil. Because that's where it ends up, doesn't it? If the transgression speaks to you within your heart and you have no fear of God before your eyes, then eventually you will call that which is evil good, and that which is good evil. You will not despise evil. But let's get on to some positive things. He says in verse 5, your loving kindness, O Lord, extends to the heavens. Because there's hope. If that described you or a time in your life when that was you, don't despair. Repent, because there's hope. God's loving kindness extends to the heavens, higher than you can see. His faithfulness reaches to the skies. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. We came back a couple of weeks ago, me and my wife and my two sons, from Colorado. And you can see those tall snow-capped mountains. Massive, huge mountains that the Rockies are. It says your righteousness is like the mountains of God. What do you know about the mountains? Do you expect them to not be there? You know they're going to be there. They're just there. Big, towering, pinnacling landmarks. They're just there. And that's what God's righteousness is. It's massive, and it's present, and it's always just there. He says, your judgments are like a great deep. They're like the ocean. How deep is the ocean? Depends on where you go, I suppose. But how much water's in there? Can you imagine trying to remove the water of the ocean with a bucket? How much is there? He says that's what your judgments are like. They're like a great deep. He says, O Lord, you preserve man and beast. God is active and present in the world today. And he's preserving both man and beast. There's not a doubt in my mind that if God removed his hand from this creation, that we would spiral out of control and cease to exist in no time at all. There's not a doubt in my mind. Because he preserves both man and beast. He is in control. It says, how precious is your loving kindness, O God. You ever considered the fact, what if God wasn't good? What if God wasn't kind and loving? What if he wasn't? What if he was a mean dictator, but he was still all-powerful? How miserable and terrible would our lives be? But he's not. He's loving. And how precious is that in our sight? How precious is it that God is a God of love? That's how he describes himself. That's the character he says, I am love in 1 John. Not in that many words, but that's what he says. He says, and the children of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. Because the world is evil. There's wickedness out there. You don't have to look far. I know we live in some troubling times. But it's out there. And it's disturbing. But you know what? We can take refuge in the shadow of his wings. That's where the children of God, men, take refuge. That's where their safe place is. If you've ever seen a bird or a hen shelter her little ones under her wings, you know exactly what this picture is. You know that little baby chicks are so susceptible to anything. Food, water, they swallow the wrong thing. The predators, other chickens, all of them can so easily destroy them. So what does the mother hen do? Well, she keeps them under her wings. That's what God is for us. That's what he is for his children. While they're there, verse 8, they drink their fill of the abundance of your house, or the fatness of your house, another translation says. And you give them to drink of the river of your delights. This concept, because this is a Jewish psalm, of course, the time of David, the tabernacle is standing. The concept here is that of the peace offering. The time when you're right with God now. You've given your burnt offering and your grain offerings, and now you're offering the peace offering. And you're partaking of God's abundance. Celebrating that relationship you have. Partaking of the fatness, of the goodness of God. And in a real way, in the peace offering sacrifice, you eat of the rich parts of the animal that you're sacrificing to God. The part that's burned in the fire in the picture form is seen as that which God's partaking of. And you, in a real way, sit down with your family there at the worship place and eat of the rest of it. You partake in this beautiful meal together and partake of the fatness and the richness of God's house in a real way. And this psalm kind of gets that imagery and says, when you're under his wings, when you're with God, when you're on his side, you partake of his richness. You drink of his river, because that's what kind of abundance he has. It says in verse 9, for with you is the fountain of life. In your light, we see light. I think that's beautiful. And I'm not going to pretend I understand all of that. But in your light, we see light. That's worth meditating on. Then in verse 10, he concludes, because we've contrasted where the wicked are at and where those who are in the shadow of God's wings, who partake of his blessing and provision and protection. And then he kind of gives a conclusion in verses 10 through 12. He says, oh, continue your loving kindness to those who know you. Let's keep this going. And your righteousness to the upright in heart. Let not the foot of pride come upon me, and let not the hand of the wicked drive me away. I think that verse is key. It says, let not the foot of pride come upon me. Because it can lead me away. If I get proud and I don't continue to be humble in heart, if I start to think that I've done these things, if I am special and I have made myself in whatever way it is, then I could cease to rely on God, His protection and provision and His righteousness. And I might start listening to the desires of my own heart because I made this. I did this. Pride leadeth before a fall. It surely does. And so David says, let not the foot of pride come upon me. And also, let not the hand of the wicked drive me away. I want to remain right here where God is. I want to remain in His house. I want to remain under His wings. I want His righteousness. I want His justice and faithfulness. That's where I want to stay. He says, there the doers of iniquity have fallen. They have been thrust down and cannot rise. Because when you're to the state when you do not despise evil, when you think evil's okay, it's going to be awfully hard to get out of that pit. It's going to take the hand of God to get you out. It's going to take change, an incredible change in that person to change. Because now you're at the state to where you call that which is evil desirable. Instead of looking at God's amazing righteousness and His justice and His goodness and His love and the fountains of life and saying, not interested in that. I would rather partake of all the dark, terrible things that can be done and are done on this earth. Well, I hope this psalm has given you plenty to think about and meditate on. If you're willing, I would like to ask you, those of you who are watching, to maybe take a few minutes or even a few hours if you have the time this week and read this psalm again. And just stop and read again the parts that stick out to you. Just meditate on them. Let them fill you, because where your mind is, your words and your actions will follow. If you spend all your time meditating only on the bad, even if you're just worried about the bad, it will consume you. But if you spend some time in God's Word, whether it's in His Word or with prayer or something else, but I encourage you, spend it in Psalm 36. Spend some time. Let your thoughts become these thoughts, and your words will follow, and then your actions and your attitudes. And I believe it will bless you. Well, this has been Biblical Musings on Psalm 36. Thank you for joining us. Till we see next time, God bless.